Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Jericho Road. I'm so happy to have you join me on this journey through the world of Jesus, and we're trying to make this class and podcast interactive. So if you've got any questions for me, you can send those to me at rwebster@st-lukes.com, rwebster@st-lukes.com. I'll try to answer your questions, and I'll add these in future podcasts so that we can make this class a little more of a dialogue, a little more back and forth as we journey through the world of Jesus together. Today we're going to talk about the call of a tax collector, but before to be a disciple. But before we get started, I want to think about something that a professor once said to me. He said that human beings have an infinite capacity to mess up a good thing. Human beings have an infinite capacity to mess up a good thing, which I guess we could just end the podcast right now, lesson ended, right? But I want to use this thought to help us think about the call of Levi, the tax collector, to be a follower of Jesus. And even to get us started with that, I'm going to start with something else from the world of Jesus. So not right at the tax booth, but very close. You would be interested to know that over half the Gospels take place in about a 10-mile arc on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, the northwest corner. And you look at my scribble behind, the red being the Sea of Galilee. It's about 11 miles long and about 7 miles wide. And in this 10-mile arc in the corner are all the stories that you know of the Bible, right? Capernaum and the call of the fishermen and the stilling of the storm and the healing of the paralytic and all those things, exorcising a demon. All those stories happen in a really tight area. And in one of these places you can go to today is the site, or the traditional site, of the feeding of the multitudes, or the feeding of the 5,000. It's a place called Togba, and it's really, really popular on the Pilgrim Road. So popular, in fact, that I've never been there when it wasn't just choked with tour buses and people snapping pictures. And for that reason, the crowds tend to miss a mystery, or tend to miss something important, an important lesson that happens at that site. It goes like this. There is a modern church there now that's really pretty, but they have preserved a 4th or 5th century mosaic floor on the bottom. I'll show it to you. Here's a picture of it. It's really pretty, and people take lots of pictures, but again, it's so busy in there that they miss this subtle but very, very important lesson. If you look at that mosaic carefully, it looks like stuff that you don't see around the Sea of Galilee. They're flowers that you don't see. They're birds that you don't see. They're animals that you don't see. There's even a crocodile somewhere in the corner there. And I'll show you another picture of a little tower that answers the question but still doesn't solve the mystery. The second picture is something called a nilometer. And what this little tower would do is this little tower was used to record flooding in the Nile River in Egypt, so that you know if the crops would grow. You had to have so much flooding so that you could have wheat. So it answers the question, but it doesn't solve the mystery. Here on the shore of the Sea of Galilee is a church with Nile stuff on the floor. But then when you begin to think about it, and remembering that human beings have an infinite capacity to mess up a good thing, I could say this in a little more academic form. I could say this: revolutionary ideas can become institutions and lose their punch. It works like this. The feeding of the multitudes is a radical story. God in Jesus Christ feeds 5,000 people with just a few loaves and fish, and it's a story of God's care, God's graciousness, God's generativity, God's abundance, God's love, God using His own creation to take care of folks. And it is a wildly beautiful and important miracle of Jesus to feed all these people there from the abundance of God's own heart. That's the story of the feeding of the multitudes. And so they built a church to commemorate that. But in time, which is bringing me to the floor here, in time, 300 years later, to be precise, that story had become something else. The church was built to commemorate the site of the feeding of the multitudes. The mosaic commemorates the feeding by Rome. It works this way. Egypt is the breadbasket of the Roman Empire for in Jesus' world and also in this late Roman world. And so a nilometer would commemorate the fact that when the floods come, the wheat grows and the income rises and food prices are good because you've got a lot of wheat, a lot of bread, a lot of product. And while there's prosperity, there's also more taxes for the emperor, and everybody wins. Except that's not what the story was about. The story was about generativity and grace and care and creation and equality and all that stuff. And so if the Bible teaches us anything, the Bible teaches us this. Business is business, but God is something else. Business is business, but God is something else. And that floor in Togba is a reminder that sometimes we can lose our way, and human beings have an infinite capacity to mess up a good thing. Well, if business is business, I want to read a story to you, which is I call a miracle, which is the calling of a tax collector to be a disciple. And it happens in a place of business. It happens in the tax booth. So we're going to look at Mark chapter 2, beginning with the 13th verse, and let's see if we can see anything new. Mark 2, verse 13. Jesus went out again beside the sea, and the whole crowd gathered around him, and he taught them. And as he was walking along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in Levi's house, many tax collectors were also sitting with Jesus and his disciples, but there were many who followed him. And the scribes of the Pharisees saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, and they said to the disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners." Well, as the foreign Togba reminds us, money was always on the mind of ancient people. Taxes were always on the mind of ancient people, and especially in the world of Jesus, in this tax booth. Let's say something about taxes in Jesus' day. Taxes were high in the Roman world. Taxes kept people from getting ahead. Taxes restricted social movement. So taxes were everywhere. And it sort of worked this way. Years ago, I spoke with a biblical economist who described Rome and taxes. And he said that 150 years before the birth of Jesus, thereabouts, Rome was an empire on the grow. Cities were burned, provinces were captured, wars were fought, and the money just poured in. Every time a city would fall, all the treasure would go right to the capital. And if you were living in Rome, there were no taxes. And as he pointed out, they were even giving money away. But that was 150 years before Jesus. When we get to the world of Jesus, which would be the early first century, something else had happened. By the time you get to the first century, Rome's about as big as it's going to get. There are no more lands to conquer, no more wars to fight, except on the borders. But what you have are standing armies that need to be fed. You've got infrastructure that needs to be built and maintained. You've got cities that need to be protected. And so that money's got to come from somewhere. And what would happen is that Egypt, remember we've already learned that Egypt is the breadbasket with the Nile River. Egypt would grow the wheat that would feed this machine. And so in Rome, which would be in the west, they would buy the wheat in the east. And over a century's time, all the hard currency that had been in Rome from this conquest now sat in the east in Egypt, and there's only one way to get hard currency back. Here's the economist part here. Get the hard currency back to Rome so they can buy more wheat and keep the machine running. There's only one way to get the money back on the other side, and that's a river of taxes. And so the Near East, the world of Jesus, literally sat in a river of Roman taxation that just roared from the east back to the west, and the Romans would tax just about everything. They would tax you for simply being a human being in the Roman Empire. They would tax the cart that you pulled. They would tax the animal that pulled the cart. They would tax the road that the cart traveled on. They would tax your produce or your fish, and tax. And if you were living in Galilee, you also paid taxes to Herod Antipas, and then there was the annual half-shekel tax for Jewish people. So taxes are a big deal in the Bible because they were a big deal for everybody in their lives. My hope is this podcast will reveal that taxes are in more stories than you even realized. There's a charming story about tax in Matthew's gospel. I just read Mark's account where the tax collector's name is Levi. In Matthew's gospel, his name is Matthew. And traditionally, Matthew's the writer of the gospel, although I think these days we wonder who did write Matthew. Maybe this was a tribute to Matthew the tax collector. But I do think it's cute that there would be a tax story in Matthew that's not in any other gospel. And I'm going to read it to you, and then we'll see if we can talk about it. It's Matthew 17, beginning with the 24th verse. It goes like this. When they reached Capernaum, the collectors of the temple tax, so that's the half-shekel annual tax, came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" He said, "Yes, he does." And when he came home, Jesus spoke of it first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From who do the kings of the earth take toil or tribute? From the children or from others?" And when Peter said, "From others," and Jesus said to them, "Then the children are free. However, so that we do not give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a coin. Take that and give it to them for you and for me." Now, that's an odd little story, and we might be tempted to pass this off as just another fantastical miracle of Jesus, something that wouldn't happen, that we would ever see or would ever happen for us, a coin in a fish's mouth. However, if you live in the world of Jesus or just visit that world today, you'll learn something about fish that makes this story a little different. The fish that people like to eat that come out of the Sea of Galilee are grass-eating fish. They're actually an African tilapia, and this fish is also called a mouth-brooding fish. The Hebrew and Aramaic word for it is amnun, mother fish. And so what the tilapia will do will hold eggs or hold the baby fish in their mouth, and while they're doing that process, they will also scoop up rocks on the bottom of the lake, so that for a fish to scoop up a coin is more of an everyday miracle. It's not a fantastical miracle. It's just one more everyday little miracle of God taking care of somebody, taking care of a situation, God using God's own creation to meet a need. And so then again is another story about a daily need being met. And in this case, it's taxes. That's it. So there you go. There's another little tax story. I want to show you, just to kind of get us thinking about taxes. We've got the tax part down. Then we need to think about tax collectors. And I want to show you a picture of preschool partners that I just love. Of all my titles as the minister of St. Luke's, I just love being the chaplain to preschool partners. They call me Preacher Man. That's my favorite title, Preacher Man. And Preschool Partners is a little preschool that was started by our church many years ago, over 20 years ago. And it is just lovely. Originally, Preschool Partners served underserved communities in our city and will teach the entire family system, meaning that parents learn parenting skills at Preschool Partners. So we're not just teaching the little ones their shapes and their colors and the ABCs, but we're also teaching parents good nutrition, how to get a library card, how to use PBS to teach children to read, how to balance a checkbook, stuff like that. And then in recent years, we've also included children from the neighborhood around this church, so that we have a blended community of colorblind little friends who are changing the world together. These are lifetime friendships and lifetime relationships that will continue to build the kingdom of God. Our children are just beautiful together, and they're all our St. Luke's children. Better yet, their grades are so good that our children, our St. Luke's kids through Preschool Partners who go to Birmingham City Schools, they will have other children bundled around them because they learn so well. So that Preschool Partners is a ripple effect. We're actually affecting education in a positive way through the lives of these smart little rascals. And it is not uncommon for parents to stop me in the streets of our city, and they call out Preacher Man, so I know exactly who I am to them and who they are to me. And they'll say, "Preacher Man, I need to tell you my daughter made the AB honor roll again." So most recently, thanks to the St. Luke's Foundation, which is a foundation of our church that's committed to outreach, which is something we all need to consider as part of our estate planning, is because it does so many cool things. The St. Luke's Foundation started a Preschool Partners College Scholarship. Our program now is old enough for the children who attended. Now they need something on the other end. We've got a Preschool Partners graduate that has gone to the Naval Academy. We have a couple of Preschool Partners kids in Alabama right now with grants from the Preschool Partners Scholarship. So we're changing the world. Now I'm telling you all this because as the chaplain of Preschool Partners, Preacher Man, we also have a class song. See, we don't have a budget, so I have to do the singing as well as the praying and the preaching, and I don't know that many little Sunday school songs. I couldn't remember that many, but I do know Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, found in Luke's Gospel, was a tax collector. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he, and he climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. You know the song, right? And as the Savior passed that way, he looked up in the tree, and then all the Preschool Partners children go, and he said, "Zacchaeus, you come down." They love it. It's a favorite song for "I'm Going to Your House Today." Now, I'm not going to sing it for you, but that's it. And then you just sing it over and over like children like to do, because whenever we're just filling time, we sing Zacchaeus. They love Zacchaeus, which is highly ironic because people living in the world of Jesus hated Zacchaeus. They hated him. So let's remember what we've learned so far. Taxes are everywhere. 2, tax collectors are hated. Several years ago, many years ago, rather, 1986, I think, a wooden boat was found in the mud of the shores of Galilee during a drought year. I talked about this wooden boat in an earlier podcast on Capernaum, and that this little boat dates from the world of Jesus, from the time of Jesus, and there's a lot of stuff you can learn from this boat, but for our purposes now, what they learned is this little boat was made of 10 different types of wood, which means that they patched it again and again and again and again and again, which means that these Galilean fishermen were barely scraping by, which points me to 3 good reasons why they all hated tax collectors. Ready? 1, they worked for the Romans. See, by the time you get to the world of Jesus, we can dismiss what we've learned from our Roman movies, or our movies about Jesus, or movies about gladiators and stuff like that, where we think that living under Rome would be sort of like living under a police state with these plumed soldiers that would come with the sandals and the shield and the sword and bang on the door in the middle of the night and arrest you and that kind of stuff. I think that the world of Jesus living under Rome was more quiet and deadening and even deadly than that. It wasn't the plumed soldier that would get you. It would be years and years and years of rolling tax debt that you couldn't keep up with, that might force you off your ancestral land and have you doing something else that was not God's intention. That's why they hated their Roman overlords. And then you might have absentee landlords or Roman cities in places, in Bible places, in places that were supposed to belong to God's chosen people, now belong to other people who are vastly wealthy and who live in an entirely different universe. And tax collectors are Hebrews who work for them. 1. 2, everybody knew the game was rigged. The emperor would give you, or the emperor's proxies would give you a tax district. And I got to tell you, the emperor did not care how you got the taxes as long as he got his quota. As long as he got his money, he didn't care what you did or how you got it. So what tax collectors would do, and everybody knew it, and Zacchaeus did it, he confessed to it in Luke chapter 19, verse 8, is they would just skim off the top. Or they would extort or squeeze as much as they could out of everybody, pay the emperor what the emperor required, and then you get to keep the rest. And everybody couldn't stand that. 3rd, so that's the first one, is they worked for the Romans. 2, they cheated the system. 3, it made them rich. Remember the little boat with the 10 pieces of wood where they were barely scraping by? Well, Zacchaeus and Levi and his pals were pretty well dressed and pretty well fed in a world where Hebrews were on the bottom rung of the ladder, and the tax system was structured to keep them on the bottom rung. But the tax collectors could rise, and as a result, they would create a little clique of their own, and these are the people that Jesus dined with. The radical nature of this story, the miracle of this story, is that Jesus would choose one of these hated guys to be a disciple, to be his hands and his feet in the world, to learn from him, to proclaim the gospel with him. And then he would dine with Zacchaeus, with Levi's friends. I got Zacchaeus on the brain, but it's the same thing. He would dine with his friends, and in their world, dining with, eating with would confer your own status. Jesus' own status as a rabbi and a miracle worker and a teacher that no one's heard from like anything before. Someone who has set this little 10-mile arc on the northwest shore of the lake on fire is suddenly including a tax collector in his inner circle. I want to show you a little picture of Magdala. It's a synagogue in Magdala, and I took this picture when this was first opened to the public. There has been a hotel completed around it now, and it's really pretty and really cleaned up, and they're uncovering stuff every day, this little site. And I really miss the old days when it had a lot of mystery and these little stones were just coming up out of the dirt. But what you're looking at is a first century synagogue, and it's important because we know that Jesus prayed there. it took place in this part of the ark right here, right, just right here on the end. Magdala here, Bethsaida on the other end, Capernaum about in the middle, but Magdala right here. This is a place that we know Jesus prayed. It's the ultimate get. He could have preached there. He could have read from the scroll there. He certainly sat in the inner circle with the elders there, and these elders would have included Pharisees. Now, I know there are lots of places in the Bible where Jesus and the Pharisees are opponents, and this is one of these because, look, let's cut everybody a break here. Calling Levi the tax collector is pretty mind-blowing. It's probably more mind-blowing than feeding the multitudes. But the Pharisees were not merely opponents of Jesus. They weren't set up to do that. As a matter of fact, Pharisees were pretty much middle-class people whose role, whose name means separated, and that's separated in a good way. They were separated by their personal piety from the Roman world around them. You could always count on a Pharisee to interpret the law for you and help you to be different in the way that God asks us to be different. Some of you who've listened to my other stuff know that I really believe that the Bible says from page 1 to 1001 the same thing over and over. Will you be different for me? Will you be different or will you be something else? The something else is just the way the world works, but the different part is better, right? The different part, will you have my heart? Will you have my hands? Will you have my feet? Will you be different? And so Pharisees were heroes in this way. But I think I need to stop for just a second and give you a little bit of an analogy of what I think happened when it comes to God's law. Pharisees pored over the law day and night, and they interpreted it so that people would be different in the way that God asked them to be different. That's not a bad thing. However, much can be learned from the history of writing. Okay, I'll show you a picture of some early cuneiform script. This is writing that's about 5,000 years old. This is writing that came from the Near East, not very far from the world of Jesus. And writing originally was invented as sort of a form of math, that's what I'm trying to say. It was a way to record the storage of grain, the way to conduct business, the way to trade, a way for a king to amass wealth. This was the purpose of writing. And in time, God would use this new technology, this writing, this math, in order to convey the divine mind to the world. How else are we going to know what God is thinking? How else are we going to know how to hand down to our children what God wants for us? And so he gave them 10 commandments in this new form of communication, this new writing, to reveal that God wants from us humility and justice and kindness and boundaries and respect for others, right? And all the things that the 10 Commandments in total, love of God, love of neighbor, everything we needed to know. And this was God's gift to the Hebrews, and for the rest of us is the communication of the divine will for us and each other, and it's beautiful. However, in time, human beings being human beings, remember our first lesson? Human beings have an infinite capacity to mess up a good thing. This isn't a Hebrew thing, this is a human thing. The 10 Commandments become 600 plus, and the Pharisees spent a lot of time interpreting these laws. What began as a noble endeavor can oftentimes be lost, because we also learn that revolutions can become institutions. I want to read just a little bit about this. This is another showdown between Jesus and the Pharisees, and then we'll get back to tax collectors in just a second. This is Mark chapter 7, beginning with the first verse. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders, and they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it, and then there are many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups and pots and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" And he said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain they do worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandments of God and hold to human tradition.'" I think I could paraphrase what Jesus said as he quoted Isaiah 29, and that is this: business is business. God is something else. We can return to that again and again and again. And what I'm trying to say by this is that washing your hands is a good thing. Following the precepts of God is a good thing. Handing down traditions are a good thing. What we do at St. Luke's is a good thing. Communion's a good thing. Kneeling's a good thing. Magnificent soaring music is a good thing. All these are good things, but these are not ends. These are means. And we fall into spiritual danger when revolutionary ideas like the amazing grace of God become an institution, something that we can put into a box. And for this reason, Jesus calls them hypocrites, but maybe not for what you're thinking. Okay, let me go back into this podcast just a minute. Remember I told you that rolling tax debt could take you off your ancestral land? And do you remember that Jesus grew up in a little poor town called Nazareth? It was so poor it's not even mentioned in the Hebrew Scriptures. And do you remember that Joseph, Jesus' stepfather, adoptive father, was a carpenter by trade? But that word carpenter, tekton, actually means laborer. It could mean carpenter, but it also could just mean builder. And I think we were all probably grew up with the idea that Joseph as a carpenter might be an upgrade from farmer or something skilled. I've seen pictures in the back of my children's Bible with the boy Jesus watching Joseph, craft a table or something. We've all seen those romantic notions, but what I want you to consider is that that's not an upgrade. To be a laborer in an agrarian world with an agrarian religion means that somewhere along the line somebody lost the land. And you can always have taxes to blame on stuff like that. Right outside the city of Nazareth is a city, the town of Nazareth. There is a city outside of the town of Nazareth called Cephalus, which is not mentioned in the Bible, but it's a beautiful place with beautiful mosaics. And it's a Roman city that was destroyed around the time of the birth of Jesus, which means that it was rebuilt for the entirety of Jesus' childhood and young adulthood and adulthood, which also means that it was the economic engine for the community, which also means that it was within walking distance of Nazareth. He had to work there. Jesus, Joseph, his extended family, they had to participate in this economy, this opportunity to build and to put some food on the table. And when you walk into Cephalus, I like to imagine Jesus as an invisible day laborer, invisible to the Romans around him, the Son of God, literally working on a crew, working on a road crew. And as you walk into the paved Roman city of Cephalus, which looks like every other Roman city from Ephesus to Rome to Spain to Britain, I mean, they all look alike. They're amazingly uniform with the Cardo in the middle and the marketplace, and then you've got a theater off to the side. And as you walk past this lovely Roman theater, one can almost hear the actors on the stage, and an actor in a Greco-Roman theater would wear a mask, right? A mask that smiled, a mask that frowned, a mask that projected the voice. But of course, behind the mask, you do anything you want to do because you're wearing a mask that says you're happy. You don't have to be happy. It just projects to the world because you're an actor wearing a mask. And that's how they would put on the show. And there was a word for these actors. They were called hypocrites, which is the perfect word for what was happening to the Pharisees and what happens to any of us when the forms of our religion become an end and not a means. When revolutionary ideas take institutional form. Business is business, but God is something else. Near the end of Jesus' earthly life, and this is before his arrest and his crucifixion and then his resurrection for us. There's a story that's so important, it's recorded by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the first three synoptic gospels. They all three remember that someone challenged Jesus one final time about taxes. It happened this way. His opponents were trying to encircle him and put him in a corner, pay him in a corner that he couldn't escape. And so someone says, Jesus, is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? And you would think that they've got him. Because you can go with the populist side. If he says it's not lawful to pay taxes to the emperor, they could turn him into the authorities. Or they can appeal to the authority side, and if he says, well, it is lawful to pay taxes to the emperor, then the people would just string him up. And I may have said that all wrong, but you get what I'm saying. He can't get out of the corner on this one, except that he does. Now he says to someone, he says, give me a coin. And they reach in their pocket of their robe and they pull out a coin that has a picture of the emperor on it. Now, I have preached on this, and I've grown up with this, and I've always assumed this was the height of hypocrisy, that his opponent would have a coin with the head of the emperor, because temple coinage or coinage in Jerusalem was ani-iconic. It didn't have a face on it. It's in keeping with the law, and they were given an exemption by the Roman government. The only country in their world that was given this exemption. They could have a coin that didn't have the emperor's face, if you will, which was the mass communication of the day. It showed you who was in charge. But on this day, this guy has the emperor's coin in his pocket, and I can't tell you how many times I thought, what a hypocrite for having that coin. However, thinking about it a little bit more, and thinking about business being business and God being something else, I'm not so sure Jesus was trying to trip him up. I don't think he was trying to shame him. I don't think this was a revelation of anything. First of all, we have nothing in the text to suggest that they had to be in the temple precincts, which is just the place where you could only have temple coinage. That's the first thing. Second thing is that everybody was from somewhere else during the festival times in Jerusalem. I mean, they would come from the hinterlands and swell Jerusalem from tens of thousands to 1 million people. And so if you were from Galilee, you would have a local coin. And so this guy basically is just participating in the economy, if you will, of the world, and business being business. He's got a coin with the emperor's face on it, and then Jesus says this, and he undercuts everything that they had hoped to do in terms of the trap. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, God the things that are God's. Business is business. God is something else. Oh, pay the taxes that are due, stay out of trouble, keep your nose clean with the government. That's just a means. The end is a heart for God. The end is a hand and feet and a soul willing to serve. The end is a relationship with the creator of the cosmos who knows the dreams you had last night. He got them. See, taxes are just taxes. God is something else. Caesar can have his money. God is over all. And this is why he could call a tax collector from his tax booth. It's a wonderful, wonderful reminder of the generativity and the abundance and the gracious love of God for all of us. Remember, it's a very human problem to mess up a good thing. God did not ask St. Luke's or any of our churches or any of our endeavors to be the greatest nonprofits in our cities. God didn't ask us to do that. God did not ask us to hand something down with more value to our children in terms of our church property. Jesus didn't die for that. Jesus didn't die for us to attract really, really cute people. That's not what this is. Our church is simply a means to an end, and that is relationship with the divine mind as revealed through God's people and through his commandments and through his miracles and through his daily visitations again and again and again and again in an adventure that we call faith. Which leaves us with a couple questions, and I'll ask these. How has God given you an everyday miracle? Kind of like the coin in the fish's mouth. How have you gotten an everyday miracle? And by the way, you have. So just think about it. How has God done it? When has God done it? Because we all have them. Finally, what does God want from you? What's your plan? How are you hands? How are you feet? How are you heart? What does God want from you? Well, I hope this has gotten you thinking about taxes, business being business, God something else, and the human capacity to mess up a good thing. Next week in our podcast, we're going to talk about the role of Gentiles in the world of Jesus. And I'll see you then.